Welcome to the How to Scale Commercial Real Estate Show. Whether you are an active or passive investor, we'll teach you how to scale your real estate investing business into something big.
Allie Boone is formerly an aerospace engineer. She's an entrepreneur, a real estate investor, author, and real estate investing coach. After leaving her 9-to-5 to pursue ultimate freedom through entrepreneurship, her company, Hipster Investments, managed to facilitate over $18 million in real estate transactions in its first 5 years. She's a longtime writer for Bigger Pockets, has been featured on The Motley Fool, Fox Business, Business Insider, Investopedia, and U.S. News. She also recently authored Not Your How-To Guide to Real Estate Investing, Life Lessons for Hacking Your Mind Before You Hack Your Wallet. Outside of real estate, Allie also teaches flying and can often be found snowboarding or volunteering in prisons. And her ultimate goal is to one day challenge Tim Ferriss to a lifestyle design duel. Allie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Hey, the pleasure's mine. I mean, that's a heck of a bio. You've done a lot of things, and that's just a lot of stuff to cover here all at once. Even just chatting off there, I'm like, oh wow, we can go 900 directions with this podcast.
Well, and even when I hear my own bio, I'm like, I used to be so energetic when I was younger. I'm like, that sounds like a lot. I'm like, I don't know if I'm that busy these days.
you probably streamline as you as we age. But
that's what we'll call it, streamlining. Like, I think it's called getting old, but
hey, easy. I resemble that remark. Hey, the same question to ask everybody comes to the shows. Where did you start? Where are you now? And how did you get there?
Where did I start? So I started with the typical mindset that everybody, I feel like in Western society kind of gets, is like, go to school, get good grades, get the good job, get job security, retire when you're 65, end of story. So I started there. I started kind of everywhere, but I tell the story all the time of I went to school, I got a master's degree, and then I got my first big girl job. And before I ever even sat down in my first cubicle, I turned the corner into the cubicle and I was like, uh-oh. Like, I knew it was not going to be the thing at all. I was like, I got to get out of here. Hadn't even sat down yet. I'm like, oh, I'm glad I just went through 8 or 9 years of school. Cool. So I spent the next 5 years in my corporate job trying to find a way out. I didn't know what that was going to be. Was I going to start a business? Was I going to be real estate investing? Those seem to be kind of the two things that get people out of corporate. But I was like, I don't care what it is, just get me out of here. So it took about 5 years, and I actually wasn't even really planning on real estate, but while I was still there and trying to find my way out, some real estate opportunities, because I was looking into everything, they kind of hit my desk. And I was like, well, while I still have a paycheck, while I'm still here and I qualify for mortgages, maybe I should do something smart with my money. So I started investing in turnkey rental properties, had never heard of the concept, didn't know what it was, but I was like, hands off, tell me more. I'd looked into flipping, just different things, and they just kind of weren't quite my thing, but turnkeys showed up. So I started buying those for myself. I got practice with creative financing. I did all this. And suddenly everybody wanted to know what I was buying, because they're like, wait, you just bought a property you don't have to put work into, and it's 2,200 miles away from you. Tell me more. So I started telling everyone just kind of casually about this. And suddenly I became this like go-to turnkey, like, who are you buying through? What are you buying? How are you doing that? And it built a business. I started talking to so many people, and then over the years, so I've done a lot with turnkeys. Turnkeys are a little on the low inventory side right now, if you want to call it that. But over those years too, I took on a lot of business consulting, real estate coaching. So I'm doing more of that right now, just because of where the market is and all that. So that's kind of how I got here today.
Wow, that's fantastic. So Turnkey has been the main product that you have worked inside of. Mm-hmm. Then turn that into, just by opening your mouth and talking to people, built the business around kind of the business coaching side of that.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot more control over my mouth than I do turnkey providers. I'm like, oh, it's nice not to have to deal with all these people for a minute. I'm like, I'm in charge.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What have been some ups and downs in doing straight turnkey?
Oh man, straight turn. Oh, I'm like, where's my glass of wine? I'm like, here we go. Turnkeys are funny because they're in theory the most hands-off they're not completely hands off, but they're about as hands off as you can get for rental properties, which is great. But there's also this expectation then that you can be completely hands off and kind of brains off, if you will. So a lot of my job and working with other people is like, hey, don't trust everything that comes on your desk. Like, yes, in a perfect world, this would be a perfect equation. Everything would show up on your doorstep as advertised. It doesn't usually work like that. My theory is if there's humans involved, there's room for error. And so I would say my absolute number one biggest low point, if that's proper, I don't know if it sounded funny as it came out, is the turnkey providers themselves, because you're putting a lot of, I don't want to call it trust, but like they're doing all the work for you. And the thing with turnkey providers, God bless them, there's a couple of exceptions to this, but for the most part, they are so good at what they do, which is finding these distressed properties, rehabbing the properties. They're technically oriented. And that's great because they're giving us the product that we need. But my experience has been, because they're such technical people, so often the customer service, communication, just that bigger picture, interaction type of those skills, like, oh, shoot me. And because, in my position, I'm connecting buyers with these turnkey providers. And sometimes if the turnkey providers start slacking and then the buyer's stressed out, I'm stuck in the middle. I can't make anyone do anything. So yeah, quite easily, the turnkey providers themselves have been the most frustrating part of the whole thing. But the perk to it, at least for me, like the most rewarding thing for me is watching people get rental properties. And with turnkeys, a lot of times it's people who may not have invested otherwise. I was one of those people. Like a lot of these people buying turnkeys, they don't want to flip a property. They're never going to flip a property. They have all these reasons why they may not otherwise get into real estate. And so getting to watch them get something and do get the education, learn about it. It's like, oh, like it's rewarding for me. And it makes me really excited until the turnkey providers start stressing them out. And then there's that up and down dipping you were talking about.
Right. Yeah. Some of the ups and downs, it was sitting on this side of the microphone, when we look at commercial assets, when we look at, scaling and growing, like, I don't even know how else to say this. I'm just going to shoot straight, right? Like
turnkeys suck for it.
Yeah. Like I think about turnkey and I'm like, gosh, man, like that's probably the last place I would go. And not that there's investing for everybody, because it's like, there's a lot of middlemen. Yep. There is generally disalignment of interest, between the turnkey provider and the ultimate end buyer, right? Like, how do you overcome some of that stuff? Like, oh, they make money on vacancy, right? Oh, we're going to charge another month's rent to stick a new tenant in there. Great.
Yeah.
There went 1/12 of the revenue. So like, how do you?
Well, a lot of it easily, hands down, the biggest disadvantage to turnkeys, as you alluded to, is scaling. Because if you do your typical, I was about to say stereotypical, but your typical traditional, that's the word I was thinking of, your traditional value add deal, you buy a distressed property, you put X number of dollars into the rehab, and suddenly you force depreciation. So you're snowballing and you're compounding your funds. So that way, you don't have your full 20% stuck in that property. Right. With turnkeys, because you're buying them at market value with really no way to improve them, you're literally putting 20% down every property. And so it's like, well, how many 20% downs do we have? Right. And so I'm actually working on an ebook right now that is specific to how to scale turnkeys. And no doubt about it, that is the biggest downfall. But there's certain ways to look at it. Like, if I think of who would be buying turnkeys, there's different reasons for people to buy turnkeys. I already mentioned one, which is someone who may just not, maybe they don't even want to scale. They just want to do something smart with their money. Just buy a long-term asset, great returns, cool. Another one that I've seen, kind of thinking about this commercial thing, is turnkeys, in my opinion, can be such a good entry point to real estate. Just because you start with a turnkey absolutely does not mean you have to stick with turnkeys forever. I've seen so many people get 1, 2, 3 turnkeys. And through that experience, they start networking, they meet different people. Suddenly they're working directly with the folks doing the properties. So now they are more into the rehabs. Suddenly they're working with, getting into commercial stuff. My absolute favorite turnkey provider, who actually is very good at customer service, he's been out of inventory because of 2020 since October, but he does a lot of commercial stuff. He's like my one provider where if somebody actually wants a commercial deal, and it very easily may be a rehab deal, force that appreciation, he can do commercial. So it's it's the idea of using it as kind of just an entry point to get you further along. Because think about it. If you start with, let's call it a 16 unit distressed shacky apartment complex as your very first investment, you're taking on a lot. And turnkeys give you a chance, because all the, as I call it, the hard stuff is done for you.
Right.
It gives you a chance to learn the absolute basic fundamentals, how to analyze deals, how to run the numbers, how to do due diligence, how to look at all those different components. And if you take the time and get a property or two to learn all of that, then think about what you can do with that 16 unit apartment building. As a starting point, commercials, it can be a little bit harder. It can certainly work, but it can be a little bit harder. And then, there's different ways, specifically scaling with turnkeys. There are creative financing options. I know a guy who creatively financed 12 turnkeys. And so there's certain different ways. It's definitely more challenging than other strategies. But like I said, I think, kind of as we're talking a little bit more about commercial, looking at it as a stepping stone, you're not tied to it for the rest of your life. And it's just a great, kind of entry to really set yourself up for the best chance of success with the bigger stuff.
How do you guys vet deals? Because turnkey providers will send you opportunities, and how do you vet the good ones from the bad ones? And how do you teach people who are working alongside you to spot those?
Well, there's really kind of we'll call it two parts of the due diligence. Like, figuring out what provider you want to work with, what neighborhoods does this particular provider offer properties in. That's the big thing, is like, I don't want some sketchy street that's going to give me bad tenants and, rough numbers and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times it's just, granted, this is going to sound like you just have to trust what's coming out of their mouth, but you kind of have a chance to verify this later, is like talking to the provider. And they're pretty good about, if you say like, hey, I want a B+ neighborhood, I'm looking for this, and this. And then also getting their take on, what's your experience been in terms of the different neighborhoods. If there's 3 properties I'm looking at, what are the differences? What can I expect with each one? And let's see which one fits. They're usually pretty good about kind of, I won't say catering to your wants, but at least like informing you, giving the information. I've never really known a turnkey provider to give false information, but that's the first step, is really talking to the people, like, what's their focus? If they only operate in D neighborhoods versus like B+, or, what are we working with? And then the nice thing about turnkey, especially even for the new investors, is that you don't have to figure out everything. It's like, what neighborhood do I want to buy in? What market do I want to buy in? What are all the numbers? How do I know what's good? My theory is, listen, let the provider tell you what's good. And then when you start to select a property and you narrow it down, then you have the chance to verify everything. Because it's like, okay, great, I know what he told me. Well, let's check and see. There's so many ways to do due diligence on the numbers, make sure that the numbers actually make sense. You can do things like Rent Facts Pro reports. There's so many ways to get confirmation of numbers, confirmation of the neighborhood quality. Obviously, we can't predict everything, but I've actually got a big document full of due diligence things that you can do to, set yourself up. So it's that kind of 2-part thing. So it's, the thing with turnkeys is you're not likely local. So you are kind of taking someone's word for it, but also understanding that you have the chance to verify what they told you.
Right. I love that. How do you make money? I know you present these opportunities, potential buyers, but how does that transaction take place, and how do you get money in this? How do you get paid in this deal?
So the great part for the buyers is I'm free for them. They don't pay me anything to help them. So I make the referral fee from the provider. And everybody's first question is, well, wait a minute, if they're paying you a referral fee, I'm probably paying more for the house, because you even mentioned the middleman earlier. So like, if you work directly with a provider, you're going to pay the exact same price for a property as if I introduce you to that provider. Like, it actually ends up being the provider to take the hit on their margins to pay me the referral fee, which is great, because then, the buyer gets added help, which is me, for free. We're all kind of winning. And then that way too, like, it's also a help to the provider, because I can kind of help qualify people that I send to them. I'm kind of a filter for them, and I can kind of do that customer service role for them. God bless, they need help on that. So, we all kind of win with that equation, and it's been great. But like I said, there's a lot of working with a turnkey provider on that. Whereas, like coaching and consulting, when I do that, like, that's my project. That's, I don't have to worry about who's in the equation. It's just a more direct thing.
Right. So you worked 5 years in your cubicle, and this has been the one and single exit that you've taken.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, so it was about, it was, 9, or let's see, why am I blanking on my math? Exactly 9 years ago, this month, actually, I walked out of corporate. But what was really cool is I built it up for maybe 8 months. I think it was a year before I left corporate that I started investing. And then maybe about 6 or 8 months that I was really kind of building. I was like, wait a minute, do I have something here? Like, Bigger Pockets had reached out. They said, do you want to write for us? I was like, okay. And so I was trying to build it as much as I could. And it was a very organic, kind of graceful thing, as much as organic and graceful as jumping ship and, hoping to God you have a parachute on can be.
Right. I love that. I love that. That's a great story. I love what you've done so far. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some mindset stuff.
Oh, I love mine. Oh boy. Oh, now we're going. It's my favorite.
You played rugby in college, right?
I did.
You are a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And you're also a what's the C in CFI? Certified flight instructor?
Certified flight instructor.
You never know with the acronym. Certificated flight, I don't know.
Depends on who you ask.
Right. Let's go on the flying forums and have an argument over it.
Some students who might be frustrated may have a totally different word for it.
So you're a certified flight instructor. You played rugby in college. You even did some banner towing, I think.
I did.
Kind of a hilarious and awesome, short stint down in, what did you say it was, Miami?
Miami, yeah.
Right. Avid outdoorsman, snowboarder, all those fun things. What has a lot of these have some similarities, especially rugby, and I think being a pilot. What have been some of those things in both playing sports and having a very exacting, it's not a career, but a very exacting discipline such as flying taught you about mindset?
Ooh, what a great question. What have they taught me about mindset? It's funny. I'll do the flying one because that comes to mind first. Flying is funny. You know this because you fly, is everything you do as a pilot is in a checklist. Right. If you have your normal checklist and if something happens, you go to a different checklist. Like every single thing is a checklist. And it's not that flying taught me what mindset I want to have. It taught me what mindset I don't want to have. So I went to flight school with a whole bunch of guys. We were all great friends. 3 of us moved down to Miami. We went to banner tow. So I've been around my pilot guy friends for a very long time. Sure. And I hope he's not listening to this. One of my absolute best friends, he became my investor partner. We're still great friends today. He was dating a girl. And the 3 of us we were actually snowboarding. And long story short, she was learning how to snowboard, and him being the pilot, there's kind of a checklist of how you can most efficiently learn how to snowboard. You do this, and then you do this, and then you learn this, and then you do that. She could have cared less about the order of things. She literally strapped her snowboard on and just went down the mountain. Wow. She was having the time of her life. His pilot brain was freaking out. and so I'm watching these students. So they started to they were having some strain. And I was like, what is going on? And watching this, it made me realize how often pilots operate, how they operate in the cockpit, they operate in life. It's like there's an order of things. There's a checklist of things. If something goes wrong, you go to another checklist. And then if there's not a checklist for this thing in life, they're like, what do I do? And I never really carried the cockpit outside of the airplane, which you can probably tell because I left corporate for real estate and, hope that parachute was going to open. I did not do a checklist type of life thing, but even at the very beginning of the episode, when you said, tell me about yourself, that was almost a checklist. Go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a secure job, retire when you're 65. Like that's a checklist. So, things like rugby, snowboarding, all of those are outside of the checklist. And that's kind of how I've always lived, is outside of the checklist of who cares what's supposed to be next. There's not really a supposed to anyways. All those shoulds, the things we should do. I love when people say when you should all over yourself. And, and so that's been a big mindset that I, in all regards, real estate, entrepreneurship, life, everything is like how to not get stuck on that checklist. The checklist is phenomenal and absolutely critical for the airplane. Outside of that, So it's like finding those different places where that mentality works versus, learning to adjust your mentality for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Like people trying to get out of corporate, there's no checklist for that. Like you just kind of got to strap on a little bit of confidence and figure it out. So, that's flying has taught me the non-mindset. Is that even a thing?
It is now.
It's shown me the opposite of the mindset learning.
Right. That's interesting. That's not the answer I would have expected, and I like that. So tell me about how that has helped define success for you than not working on a checklist.
So it's funny because I'm answering all of his questions with the opposite. What it's done is I even told the story in my book is I remember there was a time when I woke up, I was 13 years old, and I thought, I want to make a lot of money when I'm older. And it wasn't for pretentious reasons. It wasn't for anything other than just like a self-challenge. Like, I bet I can figure it. Here I am, little Miss Brainiac. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. This will be fun. It's a challenge. And over time, so if I had followed a checklist mentality, there would have been a very linear way to get to making a lot of money. And what happened to me, probably before I started getting out of corporate, but certainly once I got out of corporate, when I left my corporate job, suddenly I woke up in my house and I'm like, just kind of out here on my own. Oh, I have nowhere to be. I don't know where my income's coming from. It was like for someone who is an engineer and a pilot, which is a very controlling. So, I can control the airplane, I can control engineering, I can control the numbers. Suddenly I didn't have a lot of control, if any. And so that really kind of propelled this non-checklist mentality of, right now. So I've been an entrepreneur for 9-10 years. And I would probably argue that had I followed the checklist mentality, I could probably be making a gajillion dollars, right? I could have figured that out. I could be a multimillionaire, all that kind of stuff. But through this little journey and deviating from the checklist, if we want to call it that, suddenly the money's not as important. And it's like, wait a minute, I bet I could have been one of those Shark Tank, entrepreneur investor people. They always tell the story of I worked 16-hour days for 10 years. Well, I probably could have been doing that over the 10 years too, but there's a lot of things I really like doing instead. Sleeping in. I always stay up to date on my soap opera. I like to disappear and go snowboarding for a couple days. I occasionally do a Netflix binge. It's in that those things are not on the checklist. I can promise you they are not on any entrepreneur's checklist. Right. And so, adapting that non-checklist mindset really, I think, contributes more than anything to just this idea of what are our actual goals? Like, think about, we're talking about real estate, think about financial freedom. People always say they want financial freedom. Well, what is financial freedom really? Isn't it actually kind of more like time freedom? It's not, nobody cares about financial freedom if you really think about it. Maybe, but most people don't. It's like, oh, I want to be able to live like I'm retired, do what I want, be whenever I want to do it, go anywhere. Well, that's what financial freedom gets, which, if the focus is not financial freedom, it's time freedom. How do I free myself in different ways? So I think that's been the biggest play, is just that complete reprioritizing from what my 13-year-old self, I want a lot of money. Do I though? I also kind of really want to sleep in, so and that plays a big role as one of the chapters in my book. And I swear this is not a shtick for my book, but I have a theory that there's 3 true currencies. Money, we obviously all know about, time, and sanity. And for me, and where turnkeys come in, everything I do in real estate, entrepreneurship, is I'm always looking at those 3 things, because if I want to get something, I'm going to pay for that thing in one or more of those currencies: money, time, sanity. Are turnkeys the most financially profitable things? No, not even a little bit. However, my time and sanity usually stay intact, whereas I'm not a natural rehabber or a flipper. To me, it's not worth losing all my time and sanity to save a little bit, get a little extra money. So that's really where the non-checklist mentality comes in for me. It's just that whole reprioritizing what it is we're actually trying to get and how we're going to get it.
I love the 3 currencies idea. I think that's brilliant. Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. Who have been, or what has been, some influences and maybe guides along the way for you that have kind of helped shape some of this worldview?
Probably nobody obvious. I've kind of had to figure out my own worldview. Like, one of my favorite quotes is, don't take advice from someone you wouldn't trade shoes with. And that's been one of the things that I found to be challenging is, who am I supposed to listen to on all the advice? Everyone's like, go flip a house, go wholesale, go. I'm like, I don't know. The biggest influence, people listening aren't going to know him probably. He's a real estate guy, but when I started investing, I met him to sit down and talk about the investments he was working with. He's the one who eventually introduced me to Turnkeys. And when I met this guy, I showed up at this little real estate contract and I was expecting him to have a briefcase and all that kind of stuff. So I meet him on a rooftop pool deck in LA, downtown Los Angeles. And he's in khaki shorts, flip-flops, no briefcase, no notebook. He had just gotten back from traveling to some country, I don't know. And it was like a Tuesday. And I was looking at him like, how are you doing this? Like, this is when I had my corporate job. And so he was literally living the life I wanted. I was like, well, I want my own schedule. I want to be in flip-flops on a rooftop pool deck, like on a Tuesday and just gotten back from whatever country. And so I completely ignored the contract. And I was like, tell me more. So for me, honestly, had I never met him, I don't think I would have the life that I do today, because I didn't even, first of all, know it was possible. But then he became my mentor for the next 5, 6 something years to really, he had already traversed that path. And I was like, I'm following your path. Whereas, for a lot of us, especially in real estate, because it's hard to learn real estate. We didn't learn it in school. There's so much out there. We don't know who's telling us what. If some dude sitting behind a desk 9 to 5 wearing a suit is trying to tell me about lifestyle design, I'm like, because you don't have any. What, so that for me, it's just been kind of more of those one-on-one people. I know this is unhelpful to everyone listening because it's like, oh, who do I look up? But more than like the celebrities and the known people is really for me finding the people who are demonstrating. Well, I mean, I did say Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss, of course I read the 4 Hour Work Week and that played a big role in this whole thing, but it's finding people like that who jive with what it is I'm actually trying to accomplish and focusing on their information.
Right. No, and that is helpful. That is helpful
Mm-hmm.
information. I mean, because those are questions that people ask all the time. Where do I go?
Yeah.
How do I learn? How do I train? What can I do to shift the way I think about X, Y, or Z?
Yeah.
And no, you're giving very actionable steps there. I love that. Allie, this has been a good time. We are unfortunately out of time. Is there anything else that you would like to add to our listeners before we jump into the final 4 questions, if I could speak today?
Well, I feel like I should save this to last, but you opened the door. Since I did mention the book, I actually did set up a link for your listeners to get a free digital copy of the book. There is a link on there. You can get it on Amazon if you're like me and you have to physically hold a book. But I did set up a link. I'm sure you can put it in the show notes. It's my company's name is Hipster Investments. So it's hipsterinvestments.com/ I want to make sure I say it right. Scale commercial, just one word. And if you go there, you can put in your information and get a free copy.
That's awesome, Allie.
I at least owe you that much if I've been sitting here pitching my book.
No. Please and thank you. That's great. I love that. Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes. First question for you is this. If I gave you just 20 grand to invest in real estate, you had no previous real estate investing experience, what would you do with it and why?
Oh, I hate my answer to this. I'd have to put it towards education first.
Why do you hate that answer?
Well, because it's so boring. Look, we all got in real estate. Like, I want a property. I want it now. But it's like, first of all, 20 grand's not going to get you a heck of a lot right now. So, and the market's crazy. So it's like, what better way to spend some of your money? Now, that is not an invitation to go do a 20 grand guru seminar. I'm thinking smaller scale here, but putting it towards education. And I know I tell people all the time, like, I know that's the more kind of boring, like everybody wants to get into that property, but I'm telling you, if you'll just take some time to learn just some basic things, we're not talking like years worth of education here, basic education, you will be set up for life. And if you skip that part, it's just going to be rocky. That's why there's a big dropout rate in real estate. Like I would use that money towards education while also trying to save more on top of it.
That's funny. You say there's a big dropout rate in real estate. I've never in my life given that concept a thought. I guess
That's great. That's why you're still here.
Right. Well, not even just me quitting. I'm thinking in general. Like I just didn't realize that a lot of people just get in and get back out because they can't.
Well, and even more accurate, it may even be that they technically don't get in because I mean, I don't know when you were getting into real estate, how it was, but I know for me, it's like I open up, how to be a real estate investor. And there's so much. This is actually what motivated me to write the book is like, okay, how do we slow this down? Deal with the information overload. Like it's just, it's not that it's all hard. It's just tricky because there's so much. And so I feel like people quite often they want to do it and then they just can't get their footing or they kind of start into it. I know I've heard people all the time that just dive into some property and they're like, do you think it's a good deal? I'm like, do you? And they're like, I mean, I guess. And they don't know what they're looking at just because you don't know what you don't know. So there's just kind of a lot of room there, I think, for some unnecessary dropouts. Because I don't want people to drop out. I want everyone to be in real estate if they want to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Question number 2 for you is this. If you could help our listeners avoid just one mistake in real estate, what would it be and how would you avoid it?
Oh, hands down, taking advice from someone you would not trade shoes with. that is part of that kind of deciphering, sifting through the information is don't listen to everybody because there are a lot of voices screaming out what you should be doing. Right. And just be very cognizant. And a lot of the big platforms, there's not necessarily checks and balances as far as what people are telling you. So, keep that little kind of inner voice and guidance because that's really how you're going to become successful is you have to do it your own way anyways. But just really kind of just watching out for 2 reasons. Number 1, information overload. And number 2, taking advice from someone who has a completely different skill set from you, completely different perspective, completely different goals.
Right. Great. Love that. Question number 3, when it comes to investing in the world, what's one thing you're doing right now to make the world a better place?
That goes back to my volunteering in prisons. It's kind of my favorite thing. I like working with, a lot of people in prison, if not the majority, have been told they're worthless. They're going to die in prison. They're just the scum of the earth. And to get in there and to meet these people and to realize in most cases, there's always exceptions to the rule, but in most cases, that's not true. And they're just humans like the rest of us and just kind of giving that light of hope to them where, usually they don't have access to that. If I could change the world from the prisons inside out, done.
That's fantastic. Good for you. Last question. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
So go to that link, hipsterinvestments.com/scale commercial and put your info there and you'll get all my contact information. You can reach out. And I love talking to people, even if you could care less about turnkeys or whatever, reach out, say hi. I love meeting everybody.
Allie, thank you for your time today. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to the How to Scale Commercial Real Estate podcast. If you can do me a favor and subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever platform it is you use to listen, if you can do that for us, that would be a fantastic help to the show. It helps us both attract new listeners as well as rank higher on those directories. So appreciate you listening. Thanks so much and hope to catch you on the next episode.